hot take. The next World Cup will be won by an African country. Let me tell you how. Hey everybody, it's Raf, and in today's video, I have narrowed down 4 of the most important steps essential for one of the African nations to finally lift the World Cup in 2026. Without all of these steps getting checked off, it will never happen. So before we get into it, take a moment and hit the subscribe button. Now, Africa has always been known to have a rich and diverse history full of immense talent when it comes to the beautiful game. Africa has yet to hoist the ultimate prize in football. If you have any doubt of an African country's ability to win the World Cup, I'm about to change your mind by the end of this video. Coming up to the first ever Middle Eastern World Cup, the host country Qatar were made to be public enemy number 1 by countries virtual signaling like they don't stink. On the footballing side of things, we were all eagerly anticipating a blockbuster final. Either a Ronaldo versus Messi, the GOAT showdown that would have been the final of all finals, the Portuguese went home crying, or a South American showdown, an Argentina versus Brazil. This guy said, nah bruh. Or was football finally coming home with an England triumph? Their fate was left in a Spurs player's hands. What did you expect? So in the end, we got an old versus new era matchup. Messi's Argentina versus Mbappe's France. The old came out on top, making this one of, if not the best World Cup final ever. But in between the usual Hollywood storylines we all drool for, every football fan also loves an underdog story. And we got exactly that. The heroics of the North Africans Morocco. Without much expectations before the tournament started, Morocco held their own in a difficult group featuring Croatia, Belgium and Canada. With a goalless draw in the opener against Croatia and 2 wins against Belgium and Canada, the Atlas Lions went on to face the previous champions Spain in the round of 16. They continued with a systematic defensive display to keep the Spaniards at bay and then beating them on penalties. They then moved on to the quarterfinals against predicted finalist Portugal. The Portuguese went home crying. The Moroccans became the first African team to reach the semi-finals of a World Cup. Facing the holders France, their courageous effort against an experienced nation wasn't enough. Their journey ended as they were beaten 2-0, an effort for the continent to be proud of. That takes us to the first step for an African country to reach the ultimate prize: a star. I can't remember a World Cup win without this. These are the last World Cup winning countries going back till 1998. They all had a player or two that defined them, gave them hope and inspired victories on their way to the trophy. Recently it was Messi with Argentina. In the previous World Cup it was Mbappe with France. Then it was Müller with Germany, Xavi and Iniesta at Spain, Andrea Pirlo and Cannavaro with Italy. Even Materazzi might be considered a hero in some corners of Italy. But we move. Ronaldo R9 with Brazil, and then Zinedine Zidane with France. And throughout the years, even Africa has produced many great players. The likes of Samuel Eto'o, George Weah, Didier Drogba, Roger Milla, Hossam Hassan, Kanu, Abedi Pele, and many more African greats. But unfortunately, they never managed to help their countries when it got to the World Cup. And currently, there are top players who could be the inspiration and hope their countries need. Salah with Egypt, Mane at Senegal, Hakimi with Morocco, Mahrez Algeria, Osenheim at Nigeria, Partey at Ghana, and even Zaha with Ivory Coast. All with star quality, but are facing similar issues to the previous generation: the amount of quality players across the whole squad. But even with that, Roger Milla wrote his name in the history books by taking his Cameroon side on a legendary attempt to lift the trophy. They started their Italian 90s campaign with one of the most iconic victories in World Cup history, beating Diego Maradona's Argentina by a goal to nil. A shock to everyone but Cameroon, because they went on to top their group when Roger Milla announced himself to the world stage with 2 goals against Romania. In the round of 16, he again carried his countrymen to the quarterfinals with another 2 goals, and then this legendary celebration was created, making them the first African nation to reach the quarterfinals of a World Cup. They held their own against England until an extra time penalty for England to go through. So what has to actually happen to see an outsider win the World Cup? The closest we came to that was one of the most iconic World Cups ever, the 2002 Korea-Japan World Cup. It's the only time a number of nations without much expectations went far in the tournament. For example, in the first game of the tournament, this barely known Senegal team beat this French side. And that set the tone for the rest of the group stages, with the knockout stages looking like a proper World Cup for once. United States, South Korea, Senegal and Turkey playing in the quarterfinals, with South Korea and Turkey advancing to play each other for the third place. What a dream it would have been if one of them made it to the finals. And that takes us to the second step. I think is the most important one by far, and luckily it's already happening. The continuous improvement of producing high quality players who are actually playing in top leagues across Europe. Have a look at this. This is a graph of the number of African players at each of the major leagues across Europe. Unsurprisingly, the French league has the highest number of African players with 107. The Belgian and Turkish league both with 82, whilst the Premier League, La Liga and Bundesliga are ranging from the 40s to 20s. Although unexpectedly low, it will surely increase, and here's why. The market value of African players when they hit their prime. Many clubs across Europe have made it their business model to find hidden gems in African academies to then continue their development in Europe, with many of these players generating substantial profit when bought by bigger clubs. These clubs have the highest value of African players across their squads. As you can see, they are all small to mid-level clubs who would stand to make a lot of money when they sell these players on. As a model like this continues to reap rewards for these clubs, they will continue bringing these players in to develop. This will then increase the number and quality of African players who can then help their countries in, you guessed it, the World Cup. That takes us to the next step in the quest for an African glory. It's a numbers game. Take a look at this. What you're looking at is the number of nations that qualified per continent at the Qatar World Cup. Why does the European region get triple the number of every other region? The skewed finals allocations for each region can clearly be seen in qualifications. Let's compare the UEFA and CAF for example. Both divide countries into 9 groups. The disparity appears when a nation tops their group. For UEFA, that nation goes straight to the World Cup, with the additional 3 spots to make up their 12 being decided via playoffs. For Africa's CAF, when you top your group, you don't go straight to the World Cup finals. You then go to a third round playoff to fight out for the 5 spots available. That process further reduces Africa's chances because their best nations with the most quality are then put against each other even after topping their groups. So for the 2022 World Cup qualifications, CAF's third round playoffs had Egypt versus Senegal, Cameroon versus Algeria, Ghana versus Nigeria, DR Congo versus Morocco, and Mali versus Tunisia. And in the end, countries with enormous talents like Egypt, Algeria, Nigeria, and Mali were left behind. So for an African nation to finally win the World Cup, it will take to even out the playing field as much as possible. The signs are there. Well, not really. But if you're looking for any hope like me, you have to just make them up. So you cannot tell me that Ghana were not going to win the first ever African hosted World Cup in South Africa. In 2010, Ghana fought to secure the second spot in the group to proceed to the knockout stages. They faced the United States in the round of 16 where Ghana triumphed to reach the quarterfinals of the World Cup, going head to head against Uruguay. With the game tied 1-1 in the final minute, Ghana had a chance to score, and that's when this happened. Then this, and then this.
I still love you.
But their performance in the 2010 World Cup left a legacy which most football fans still can't bear to talk about. For the last step on the way to World Cup glory, corruption. The most crippling part of the continent has to be fixed. And it might just be the most difficult step to take. Don't believe me? Well, this is Ahmed, head of African Football Confederation itself, CAF, and FIFA Vice President. He was banned from all football-related activities due to financial misconduct. The FIFA Ethics Committee found that Ahmed had breached duty of loyalty, offered gifts, mismanaged funds, and abused his position as the head of CAF president. Let me give you another one. In Cameroon, mobile phone company MTN pumped $600,000 of an $800,000 project to renovate several stadiums. Instead, $146,000 ended up in the pockets of the then sports minister so that he could breathe easier, he said after the payment. The work never happened, and the $600,000 still unaccounted for. The corruption filters through every level of the game. In August 2018, 14 referees were banned in African football over corruption in Ghana and some other African countries. Amongst these 14, 7 referees and 1 assistant were named for 10 years of footballing activities. So many high-profile African referees who have officiated on big occasions such as African Cup of Nations, international friendlies, and even World Cup qualifying games have been found guilty of corrupt practices. As you can imagine, these are just the tip of the iceberg. There are countless other examples. So in the end, can an African country actually go all the way in the 2026 World Cup? From my 4 steps, for me, if all of these are ticked off by the next tournament, it can happen. Till next time, peace.